James is at Texas Hillel. He's on mute because he's in a shared space. And Elon.
Hi, I'm Elon Schwartz. I'm the senior Jewish educator at The Ohio State University Hillel.
Amazing. And
Great.
Anna is coming back. She sent me she'll be right back. So we
Okay, great. And we already met Tom, and I think that's good. Okay, great. Always really helpful to hear from everyone. And James, I know the feeling. I've spent a lot of time in shared workspaces. All right, so we are going to launch in. I'm going to share my screen if I'm able, and let me know in just a minute if you can see my PowerPoint. Do you see my PowerPoint?
Yep.
Okay, because I don't see the rest of the Zoom screen now. Do you see me?
We do see you. And
okay, great.
Right now it's in presentation mode. So if you want to put it into play mode, you can also do that.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think I'll play. And I'm just going to have to assume that you're reading my facial expressions even if I can't read yours. But what I'll probably do actually is switch in and out of share screen a lot just so that I can kind of check in. And because I can't see your faces, by the way, if you're confused or if suddenly I go on mute, just start screaming and then I'll know to stop and come back. All right, so welcome everyone. We're excited to kick off Innovation in the Mirror, which is something that I won't throw Faith under the bus, that I really came up with after talking to Faith about some of the topics that you all have had the opportunity to engage in through the Katz Innovation webinars. And I actually had the chance to hear a bunch of them, and they were fantastic, or to hear parts of them. So I know that you've been really looking at a lot of different frames of innovation and thinking about how to apply them to your work as Hillel professionals, and I imagine beyond. And a lot of them build on one another. And we figured, because I do have a background in innovation from PresenTense, we would sort of take that frame, but flip the script and put it back on us as individuals, as humans, as professionals, as passionate people, and think about how can we start to think about ourselves and our future and the impact we want to make on the world using kind of this frame of innovation. So again, we're going to get a little more personal today. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and there'll be moments where I'll ask you just to pause and journal and then share, and my hope is that it'll be pretty interactive. So you've already met me. I've shared a little bit about my background, and here's where you can reach me. Afterward, I'm really happy to be in touch. And thanks again for being here today. So just the overall description of the session is, at PresenTense, the backbone to our curriculum that we used was in design thinking. And I know that design thinking at this point is probably pretty cliched, actually, and you've heard it a lot, but it's super useful and it's always evolving. And I thought it would be a useful frame. So we're going to use that way of thinking to understand a little more of who we are, the impact that we're going to make on the world, and even just breaking through anything that until now may have gotten in our way. And I'll mention that, of course, I know you're here in the context of being Hillel professionals, and this is not at all about, what are you thinking about beyond Hillel? Faith isn't going to report back to anyone. It's not like that at all. It's actually thinking about your work day to day at Hillel and how you can, add to that, and how you can think a little differently about the impact you're making beyond the day to day, and then moving forward, what that might look like. So I mentioned that I had the chance to listen to a couple of the different webinars, or pieces of them anyway, from this fantastic YouTube channel that Faith has been managing. So I know that design thinking has come up. This concept of jobs to be done with Elon very much draws from that. And I know that those of you on that webinar got to learn a bit about it, as well as, kind of disruption and kind of all of these topics actually that have come up. I know the one last time with Eliza was a little bit more focused on kind of life trajectories and learning from loss, which is wonderful. But if you hear things that overlap or draw from past webinars, please chime in, and or if you hear me repeating anything, again, just stop me, because I wasn't able to listen to every word of them. So we're going to dive in. Again, the focus here is kind of holding a mirror up to ourselves. And this is a luxury that we don't always get to do as busy professionals. I think so often we get caught up in the day-to-day, particularly on campus, because you're running around from event to event, engaging with lots of different stakeholders at all times. And you may get some downtime in the summer, which is nice, but I don't think that we really afford ourselves the time to think about where have we been and where are we headed, which is just, again, such a luxury. And something that's so powerful in that is that we do get to control that. We do get to control the impact ultimately that we have on this world and the direction we choose to go in. course, there are a million and one, disruptors and factors that play in, and luck and all kinds of good and bad luck and things that we can't control. But I think one of the most important things to remember, as we see from our good friend Ralph Waldo over here, is that the person you are destined to be is the person that you decide to be, that you really do have that power. And sometimes we forget that. Sometimes we feel like circumstances push us. So again, the frame that we want to use today, and I'm going to check in a minute just on where people hold on this frame, is design thinking. And you can see here where design thinking was born out of was a combination of the Stanford Design School, like visual design, arts design, and IDEO, the consultancy. Tim Brown is sort of one of the fathers of design thinking here and has written a bunch of books. And together they have built this empire to use design thinking, not only in the world of visual design, but product design and ultimately societal change design. So educators have picked it up, obviously lots of Jewish organizations, and now we're going to bring it over to us. So I'm going to attempt to stop sharing my screen for a sec, just to check in with you guys.
I was just kind of hoping.
And somebody, I think, should go on mute because you are, may we hear your conversation?
She'd be up and happier, but
Faith, I don't even see how to get back to my screen. Oh, here, let me make it bigger.
I told kindergarten to be late.
You're unmuting yourself, or Naomi, you can mute.
I told kindergarten to be late.
Yes. Was that the one? No, that was not the one.
Hold on, I can do it for you. Let me play.
Okay, that would be great. I just can't see the full screen for some reason. Okay. All right, so now that I can see your faces, I want to do there we go, a little bit of a check-in. So for those of you who I can see anyway, would love to hear how much you have worked with design thinking. So first, just a straw poll. Some of you may never have heard of it, right? So let's say on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 is you've literally never heard of design thinking, know nothing, or essentially know nothing about it, even if you've heard of it. And a 5 would be, you could teach a master class on design thinking, you spend so much time. And obviously anything between represents a spectrum. So just a couple of 3s, 4s. Great, yeah. I figured there'd be some good familiarity with it, which is awesome. Just scrolling over to see any others. Okay, great. So I'm going to assume that there is definitely some familiarity here. I'm also, though, going to do a little bit of reviewing and kind of referencing to different components of design thinking, just because not only is it a helpful frame, but it's just a great tool to know about, and we're going to do it in the context of your work at Hillel first, not that you haven't done that before. So feel free to unmute yourselves and just share, what do you know to be some of the hallmarks of design thinking? What words come to mind when you think about what design thinking means? And feel free to just jump in.
Just remember to unmute yourself if you like to share.
I can jump in. Empathy is a big one for me.
Yeah, thank you. Any other buzzwords come to mind, or sort of hallmarks of design thinking? Okay, so I'll share a couple because they'll help guide us through today. And again, hopefully it'll be a nice education as well. So let's see, resume share. You can see my screen?
Yeah.
My PowerPoint? Okay, great. So design thinking definitely has empathy as a core part of it. You'll see that right in the middle here. And this isn't rocket science, by the way. Design thinking is really just a creative, iterative process that starts with the end in mind. So very much focuses on what is a problem in the world, what is the outcome that we want to create in the world, where are we headed, right? What do we want to get to, without thinking about the actual means by which we'll get there or the actual solution that we have in mind. Just what do we want to do in the world? What do we want to change? And often in design thinking, that's framed as how might we? And the point of that is that it's an open-ended question, and it is inclusive. It's we, it's not just I. So how might we end hunger in the world? How might we engage Jewish students in Judaism? How might we any number of things? And these might sound familiar or similar to visions, right? Organizational visions. Often they're a little more granular than that, but it's kind of the big end goal. And it's so big often that we know we may not get to it in our lifetime, or we alone won't solve it. It often is done in partnership with other people or organizations. Empathy, so I just want to move the screen over. Emily mentioned that, and that is absolutely the centerpiece of design thinking. I think that's what distinguishes it. Emily, feel free to jump in if you wanted to add any more color to that. But it's essentially, let's not assume we know what our users want. Let's actually ask them, observe them, understand them, interpret, kind of get what we think that they want in this world without pushing a solution on them. So sort of a classic example in our world, in the Hilla world, would be, and this is so cliched, I apologize, but rather than saying, oh my God, we have to do Shabbat Dinner 1000, that is just the thing to do. Obviously, every student will show up because it's so huge and exciting and energetic. That's going to solve our problem of engagement. So rather than, even if you're going to go and try to understand the constituents, so go speak to a handful of students and say, would you show up to our Shabbat dinner? That is helpful, but that only gets you so far because you're still pigeonholing people into a solution. So you're still saying, would you show up to my Shabbat dinner? Another way to do that, really using empathy, is, so tell me about your experience at Tef Hillel, right? Like, what do you do on Friday nights? And how do you like to spend your weekends? And who do you hang out with? Are there places on campus you go to find, meaning or spirituality in your life? Who might you consider to be your community on campus? Is anything missing in your life? What are you looking for? I mean, these are pretty intrusive. I said that we'd get a little personal, but obviously there's a way to do it, and it's all about relationship, and you're all in the business of that. But again, it's focusing kind of not only on those open-ended questions, but on really being open to different possibilities, so that by the end of your conversations where you're theoretically going out to research whether a Shabbat 1000 program, I don't even know if those still happen, but they did when I was at Hillel. If that's your answer, you're open to the fact that it may not be, that you may leave those conversations and say, actually, what I heard is that what people really want is to gather with their friends at their dorms and just, or whatever it is, right? That I heard something different. I heard that people don't find a lot of energy in huge crowds. People want to have intimate conversations about, life and politics, and religion is a piece of that, but not everything. So that's really empathy. And the key there is that it's always focused on the end user, the constituent, but there are often lots of different groups of those. So for us, well, students are probably the main customer, I'm sure, but there may be, professors, there may be parents, there may be alumni, there may be others in the community. And the last kind of hallmark of design thinking, which is not limited to it, is prototyping and sort of this constant testing out of our hypotheses and our solutions, or our proposed solutions, to get early feedback on whether they work. And just to kind of show a really old visual from IDEO, I think if you look down here, you might see 2008 or so. But I still go back to this one for some reason. They've updated a lot. But design thinking takes you through these few broad strokes of coming up again with that initial design challenge. So what is the problem we're trying to solve in the world? And then making that bigger. So, starting with that seed, but expanding it to say, what does that include, right? Who are those affected by this challenge? What do we know about them? How can we go out and learn more about them? How can we make some, logical interpretations based on what we're seeing about them? Who else is addressing this constituency, right? So who else is working with Jewish college students on your campus, which is probably everybody, and what can we learn from them? Once you've kind of gotten it pretty big, you start to just brainstorm and think through, what are all of the ideas, the possible solutions we could come up with to answer this question? And the idea there is that if you've ever done this exercise where there are no stupid answers, only stupid people, no, I'm just kidding, there are no stupid answers. That's because you never know. A stupid answer, might lead you to a different one. It might lead you to something with a slight innovation or new feature that you hadn't thought about. And that's sort of the iterative piece of it. And it's a quantity thing. If you come up with 45 ideas, you're probably going to winnow out a few that are really solid. And in design thinking also, we look at not only, is an idea something that sounds good, but we look at, is it desired by the constituents? Is it feasible? Can we actually build it and execute it? And is it technologically viable as well? Or sorry, no, the second one was technologically. The second one is more economically viable. So would people pay for it? Gets back to desire. Can it kind of support itself? Is it going to be too expensive? Things like that. And then finally, in the last phase here, implementation, you'll test it. You'll build it, a model of it. You'll prototype it. This might be a mini Shabbat dinner, or probably even a smaller simulation, or a stand on campus. And then you'll immediately get feedback. You'll say, did you like that? What didn't you like? What would you like to see, et cetera. And that's just kind of a repetition. Any thoughts? This has changed over the years. IDEO has come out with lots of more interesting visuals. So would anyone like to add anything about what you've learned about design thinking, or pieces of the process that we sort of just moved over quickly?
I'll just say I've done a little bit of design thinking work, and one of the things is having people who are all open to this process is really important. I think got to do something around Shabbat at the last Hillel Global Assembly, and people wanted, like, here's the program idea, give me a package and answer my problem of Shabbat, rather than kind of being willing to work in the process. And so I think that's hard for both for professionals, but also sometimes for students who expect the professionals to just give them the solution. So I guess my kind of comment, but maybe also question, is how to make sure people come on board with this process in a way that they are active participants and are not kind of fighting it the whole time.
That's a great question. I think that's great. Does anyone want to jump in with any thoughts on that?
Well, one thought I had, or one word that came to mind that I was thinking about, to your point, Melissa, is that, like, this requires a lot of confidence. Like confidence in the process, but also confidence as, like, an educator or facilitator, and, like, foreshadowing for folks. Like, this is a process that, like, may not feel easy and it may not feel comfortable. And I don't know, I generally, in other parts of my life, when I think of leadership, it's often like just letting people know what's going to happen and also knowing what you don't know. And I feel like giving that language and legitimacy could be one small piece of it. I'm really curious if other people have, like, more concrete ideas that they feel like would be helpful. But I feel like we as educators, we set that tone for experimentation and play. Like this, like throwing in design thinking without any framework of, like, play and creativity, and, like, not necessarily having to have a solution right away. I don't know if it could work without all of that set. So I think it's like a long-term play also, like the cultures that we're creating at Hillel.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's certainly relationship, but I like your point that it's this balance of showing the confidence and the expertise as the educator and facilitator, because people look to you as that, but also being open and really truly listening and saying, I actually don't have all the answers. Part of what I'm doing is facilitating a process whereby I can learn from you, and that we're co-partners, we're co-creators in this process. So I think both of you name that, of really just transparency and openness from day one, stating the objectives right off the bat. So kind of, we're in this together. Our goal is to have you live a meaningful Jewish life, or whatever. I mean, I'm sure you all have your own ways of saying that. And we're really open to lots and lots of different ways to get there. And we want to better understand, what does that mean to you? And this process might mean that different people say different things, and that means ultimately not everybody's happy, but that we're really listening, and we're trying to co-design and co-create as we go based on what we're hearing. And we're asking for feedback throughout. So design thinking by nature is iterative. So please share that feedback, because that'll help inform what we do in the future. And it is taking that kind of soft and partner approach to it that I think helps people get in it. Now, you're always going to have different learning styles and personalities. So there are people for whom this will drive them crazy. They just want to get to the end. It's like Talmud is such a pain. Just tell me the bottom line, right? I don't need to hear all the commentary and process throughout. And so I think then it's knowing your audience and pulling them at the right moments, which is probably the prototype session, and saying to them, hey, it's going to take us 4 weeks to get there, because we're really doing our due diligence and talking to people. We know that your input's really valuable as, an early adopter feedback giver. Can we come ask you when we get there? And I think asking that goes a long way as well. Does that help, Melissa? Great. I think that's a really fair question, and we definitely don't want to be dictators here.
Thanks.
All right. Feel free to stop me at any point with questions about design thinking. I know you all express some good familiarity with it, so I don't want to go too deep. But I do want to just take an example from a couple of our areas of work at Hillel before we move into sort of our personal design thinking here. So I'm assuming the International Center still looks like this. It did when I was there in 2004. It's very pretty. And I figured we'd go more general rather than one Hillel. So think for a second about some of the problems that you're trying to solve, or that we're trying to solve in our work at Hillel. So, back to that very early bubble here, the design challenge at the very beginning. What's the problem? What are some of the examples of the problems that we're trying to solve? They could be, you know, no one shows up to my Hillel building anymore, or something like that. Take about 30 seconds if you can and just jot down 1 or 2 challenges. They don't need to be complex. They also don't need to be super simple. It's whatever comes to mind. And hopefully when people are, if anyone watches along at home later on, this is your chance to also journal. All right, it looks like a couple of you got a few there. So anyone want to jump in? What are 1 or 2 challenges that you're working on?
If you'd like to join the conversation and add something, just unmute yourself.
You could also chat. If you're in a loud place, you could use the chat function.
I'm happy to offer a problem. I want for any last takers to offer.
Yeah, I'll go.
Great.
I was just going to say, I don't think that our Hillel has like direct challenge. I mean, we have issues like anybody else, but so I think that a lot of the things that we're doing are trying to improve on things that we're already doing. But one of the challenges that we really have is coming up with meaningful and ways to evaluate programs and decide whether they're really going to continue or not, based on staff changes in the community, so on and so forth, so that we keep our programming fresh from year to year. You know, we're always challenged by how to, you know, get more people to participate in Shabbat and like other stuff. But, I think those are problems that are always going to be there. I don't think design thinking is going to all of a sudden solve Shabbat. But, you know, evaluating and really making sure that we're at our best is something that we really think about a lot here.
Great. That was Elon, right?
Yes, that was
okay.
me.
Great, thanks, Elon. Awesome. And I just want to pipe in for a second and then we'll break that down a bit. In design thinking parlance, problems are a good thing or sort of a way of life. It's not even about the challenges that you face organizationally or operationally. It's not like, oh, we're understaffed, so we're not running the type of programs we can. It's what are the problems you're after in the world, right? Why does Hillel exist? What is it seeking to change in the world? So that's kind of a nuance, but you got there, right? Because you talked about we're really trying to figure out how do we know when our programs are working or not. Melissa, I want to see what you held up in a second there. What does that say? Inspiring. Oh, is that your big mission? Good. I'm going to ask you to read that.
It's Hillel's mission. So
yeah. All right. we're gonna get there in a second. So Elon, if I heard you correctly, it's figuring out how do we know which programs are making the impact we want to and which aren't. How do we evaluate that effectively? How do we respond to that data and make changes? And then I think at the end I heard, how do we keep it fresh and meaningful? The programming. Is that a fair encapsulation?
Yes.
Great. Okay, excellent. So underlying that, I think, is a problem you're trying to solve in the world, or at least in your micro community. Can you or anyone else elaborate on what that problem is?
So I think that we have a sense in our Hillel that there's constant change happening. We're getting new students, new staff, everything is always changing. And how do we respond to that change while still sticking to our core values, but also honoring the things that are out there that are not with our control? So for example, all right, so we have a program called Dinner and Dialogue. Dinner and Dialogue gets doesn't get a lot of people, but it's still a great program. But what we're looking for is either if we're going to keep doing it, is it something we should keep doing? And if we aren't going to keep doing it, what's going to replace the value that it brought? And how do we objectively evaluate that? Aside from, I really don't like this program because I just don't like it, to I don't like this program, but I should do it anyway. So that's sort of really where we struggle. We just had like a big meeting about it, like put everything on a piece of paper and divided it all up and so on and so forth. I don't know that it accomplished what we wanted, but that's sort of the way we're thinking.
Mm-hmm. And
did I answer your question?
Halfway. I'm going to push you one more time.
Okay.
What made your staff or your students choose to focus on dialogue? What are you hoping to accomplish through this program?
Oh, so I actually didn't create the program. I inherited it. And our university partner unfortunately passed away. And
wow.
So, yeah, she was really sick, and it was just really quite tragic. And so the person who really had a lot of ownership in the program and was the draw to the program is no longer around.
Wow.
So it's not the same program without her.
Wow.
No matter, regardless of what the changes are in our staff and our community, it's not the same without this person. So I would categorize that as a major disruptive change to what this program has been. And now it's just kind of floating there. We do it because we've been doing the program for 10 years at least. But now we've sort of lost the oomph, I would say.
Yeah, and that's a really intense situation, and I think that that of course that's going to bring up kind of these big questions, and it's great that you're engaging in them. What it sounds like, and I should have mentioned the reason I chose this topic is because I've also done a lot of transformational training and sort of coaching and things like that, so I love this kind of work. I mean, first of all, you lost the heart and soul of it, which is so sad, and the main passion holder, and that's always going to take a toll. But it almost sounds like there was probably a significant why behind this program. My guess is that maybe this wonderful woman wanted to create this program to facilitate dialogue because people weren't, sharing their religious beliefs, or weren't engaging in meaningful conversation, or just having small talk, or wanted, I don't know, something more powerful to do than just eat hamburgers, right? That's my guess. One of those few options are probably why you wanted to have a dialogue program, or maybe it was Jews and Muslims, or, there are lots of different ways that I've seen that program unfold. But there probably was a big why behind it, such that you would say, if we run this program for 5 years or 3 years or whatever, now you're up to 10 years, we want to see a marked difference. We want to see now people are more comfortable having conversations that used to be uncomfortable, or that people show up to Hillel or to wherever because they actually want to talk about something meaningful. They're sick about talking about the frat parties, right? Like, we're going to be that force on campus that facilitates meaning in life. That something like that. Are any of those remotely on target, do you think?
Yeah, I would say so. Probably all of them and none of them, depending on the day. Yep. I think that this person, both in her own community, this was mainly Black Jewish dialogue. Okay. And this is a person who had a big draw in both communities. And as her health deteriorated, her connections sort of, and her ability to really gather people and be a connector, I think were greatly reduced. And so now we're left with the pieces. What do we do with this legacy of this individual, but without her?
Yeah. I think that's actually a perfect moment for you to pivot this a little bit and to honor her legacy in a way that's far more meaningful by refreshing probably a program, right? So it sounds like there was a why, something like that we just talked about. And what you're left with is the what, or the components of the what, which are the program. And you're kind of tired. I mean, you've been running it for 10 years. So I think a next step, and you can use today to get there, is to figure out what is the why that really motivates you and your fellow staff, as well as you believe spoke to her and her values. And that what you create out of that, again, you might brainstorm a million solutions, but one or two that you come out with, if executed really well, will honor that, and we'll get to that why in a new or different way.
But I just want to add that we should also be asking sort of the opposite question, meaning that, is it time for this program to sort of, it had its time. It was a product of our relationship as a community with this particular individual. Let's try something different now.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Meaning, when you have a vision to do something on campus, there are a million different ways to get there. You've worked on this one, plus many others, but we're talking about this one now for 10 years. It may be time. Let's think of another program that will, get us to the same general vision, or not, maybe a different part of the vision. I think that there's absolutely nothing wrong with having that conversation. In fact, it's very, very valuable. But my point is just that the program that you're talking about is a solution. And that's why we want to not just talk about the solutions because they're limiting, exactly what you just noticed. We want to look at the bigger why. What are the problems we're trying to solve on campus? And maybe the problem orientation feels a little bit negative, actually. So maybe it's, what is the outcome we want to create in the world? What do we want to see in 10 years? And there are all kinds of exercises we can do on that separately, and I'm happy to share some resources. So let's actually, I want to hear from Melissa. I know that you were sort of doing it in jest, but I am curious what the mission reads, because when I was last at Hillel, it was still, Jews doing Jews with other Jews. Great at the time, but I think it's evolved. So can you share what that is, or whatever
Sure.
it was?
Yeah, I actually keep it on my monitor. That's why I was pulling it off. Inspiring every Jewish student to make an enduring commitment to Jewish life, learning, and Israel.
Nice.
So I come back to it a lot with our staff and our students, because many different people have different ideas about what Hillel is or should be, whether it's the old kind of mission or their own kind of idea of what it should be, but coming back to this is what we're trying to do. So how is what we're doing serving this mission?
That's beautiful. Exactly. So sometimes these feel abstract, but they're really, really powerful. So it sounds like what's really significant to the Hillel movement overall is that every Jew has the opportunity to contribute to this bigger thing, and has shown not only this commitment to Jewish life and community, but to an enduring commitment, and to Israel and the other things that you mentioned. And what's nice about that is that it's so big that we can take many, many different paths to get there. And that's why each of our Hillels has 8 million programs, because there are so many ways to get there, and different people are going to find resonance in different ones, right? Not everyone will show up to an arts program. Obviously, that's not their thing. So, the problem frame, sort of, again, what's underlying that is probably, maybe we feel like Jews just don't feel Jews overall, right? Some Jewish students or non-Jewish students don't feel a particular commitment to Jewish life, or don't see themselves as having an enduring impact on the Jewish community. How sad is that, right? We believe that there is opportunity for everyone to have that impact, and that's why we're in this work. And that's what motivates us every single day, right? And that's why we're going to create lots of different programs and paths to get there, because we really believe that maybe we need some more solutions to help Jews get to that. Sorry, I shouldn't use the word. To help people, end users, constituents, get to that end goal. Does that resonate with folks?
Definitely. I spent a lot of last week talking about commitment, and how, as educators, if we're not moving towards commitment to something, then are we just perpetuating like exploratory learning, like to no end? And I think in Hillel, in our work, we very much work with people who are in an exploratory phase. And the real challenge is getting them to believe in something, to have a value of something that they're willing to commit to. So I think Naomi, that you actually really hit the nail on the head. I think for this life phase, like what the real challenge is, it's knowing what you believe in, that you're willing to like make behavioral or committed actions that are beyond, a program or even 4 years of college.
Yeah, exactly. I love the endurance piece of it. I'm sure that took a lot of marketing experts, but they got there, which is great. So we have 20 minutes. Wow. It's funny because the other seminar I offered to teach was on time management, which is something I like to do. And I'm being a terrible time manager because there's so much more to do here. So let me jump into actually applying some of this frame to ourselves, because we think about this every day. You guys are probably so tired of hearing this question of what impact we want to make on the world with Jewish students. So we want to actually flip that a little bit and think about ourselves and maybe why we got into this work, but also where are we headed. And don't worry, we'll set it up so that if we don't get to everything, you'll be able to continue with it on your own, or you can definitely reach out to me. So it's the same exact process, right? We're going to start with the end in mind, just like we did with our Hillel work, and think about what is the what is an impact that you want to make on the world? What is something that at the end of your life, you will not feel complete if you don't see something different in the world? And that's actually really scary for people to think that they alone can have that impact, but they really can, right? It's back to that earlier quote of we're in charge of our own destiny. That's not, nobody's in their destiny for themselves, I would say, for the most part. We're really in it for contribution, and what can we do? So again, this is really dramatic. So let me give you an example of mine, which is really not dramatic, and is what helped lead me to my current job at TCC Group. The change I'm looking to make in the world is that I feel like there's so much social good to do in the world, and there are so many problems to fix, right? And that's why, thankfully, nonprofits exist and leaders go into nonprofit management. But there's so many barriers to doing nonprofit work well, as we mentioned, with staff leaving or, God forbid, dying, or systems breaking, or limited resources, or whatever. So what I really want to do in the world is to help systems be able to do good in the world, to help people and nonprofits and individuals actually make a difference in the world. And if that still sounds broad to you, I was able to take it down a couple levels and realize that, well, I can actually spend my days advising nonprofit leaders on breaking down those barriers, making things more effective, clarifying their impact, and working as units and within their ecosystems to do that. So this isn't a career workshop at all. I don't mean to say it. That just happened to be my example. It could be that you really care about seeing fewer homeless people in the world. Or I guess a real vision would be getting the homeless population down to 0, because vision should always be really bold and aspirational, and then you start to break it down to make it feasible. That may or may not connect to your Hillel work right now, right? But you're at this one point in your life, and you can, of course, always include a homelessness prevention program, and or in 10 years, maybe you'll be doing something more closely related to that. So I do want to invite you to be bold and take a risk, and take a second and write down 1 or 2 changes that you're looking to make in the world. These do not have to be your be all end all. They're just something to work with today. All right, another 30 seconds, really holding you guys to the fire today. And if we were in a room, you can imagine I would have you find a buddy and share and make this a little bit more personal, and also make sure that everyone gets to speak. But please see this as informal. I hope people chime in. All right, Michelle, you're unmuted. Do you have anything to share?
Yeah, I wrote up my question. Good to see you all. So I wrote up, how might we broaden, you wanted us all using we language, right? Even though it's for our own particular end games.
Yeah, that's great. And
how might we broaden and deepen American Judaism through our work?
Nice. I'm just writing it down because I'm going to want to refer to it. Broaden and deepen Judaism. Beautiful. I love it. All right, who else?
How might we broaden resilience in our students?
Interesting. And I love when people get into personal qualities of folks that we're trying to impact, because that is literally what changes the world. Resiliency can make a huge difference. What else?
How might we empower and invest in young women in this country?
Nice. I knew these were my people here. This is great. I love that. That actually gives me the chills, Emily. All right, one more.
How might we ensure that all Jews feel like they have a Jewish home?
Oh, I love that. Oh my gosh, I love that so much, because there are so many different ways that could be. Was someone else going to jump in? Sorry.
I'll offer support and empower young people on their Jewish journey.
Great.
Journeys.
Awesome. So this is clearly a very advanced group, because my next slide was going to have you transfer it into how might we language, but I'm sure you've done this 1,000 times. So great. It's already in kind of a package that we can really work with. And these are powerful. And, I'm not surprised that they all could be applied to your Hillel work tomorrow or today, and they could broaden, which I think is really powerful, because they can take you through your life. And Michelle, to your point, yeah, we do want it in how might we, so that we feel like we're not alone on this path, and we know there are other people committed to this work. Mm-hmm. But there also is some value in looking at, well, how might I, right? What is my piece of that? So in organizational development, we talk a lot about how the vision is kind of this big aspiration we have for the world that we know that we alone can't solve. We, Hillel, can't solve. We actually need a partner also with the Muslim Student Association and with BBYO and with local community institutions, et cetera, because no one is going to solve the challenge of, empowering young adults or whatever it is alone. It needs to be a joint effort. But your mission is your piece of that, your contribution. So Hillel at Texas, Austin is doing X, Y, Z to reach that broader vision. So this is the same exact thing. The how might we's that you shared are really big, and I hope that you're not after it alone, because that's pretty daunting. But what is the contribution individually that you're going to make? And we're going to start to look at that right now. All right, so if you remember from, thank you guys so much for sharing. If you remember from design thinking, the next step that you would do kind of in that first diamond of the process was to go out there and kind of broaden that idea and observe and empathize with the constituents or the folks that are impacted by this reality in the world, right? So some of you talked about, my guess is that Emily's statement about wanting to empower young women, again, has this underlying assumption that perhaps young women are facing hardships or are not feeling empowered or do not have the tools to feel empowered or don't know how, whatever it is, to live in this world and to make an impact and be leaders. So we want to go out there and actually learn more about this population and see whether that's true and to add some color to it. So what we would do, and some of you I'm sure have done this in various design thinking workshops, and this is a broad population, but go out to a couple different neighborhoods or communities and observe young women in action at school, at the mall, volunteering, at rallies, with friends at Starbucks, etc. And in a non-creepy way, try to get a feel for what do they care about? What's plaguing them at night? What's coming really easy to them? What's inspiring to them? Who's their partner, etc. Just really make some observations. And then the next step in design thinking would be to lead that to interview. So, we see young girls not speaking up in class as much as young boys. We're going to assume that they don't feel they have the space to or the voice to. That is a huge assumption. So we would then spend some time really affirming that and supporting that, or maybe refuting it. But that's part of the process. So what we're going to have you do, and this gets a little vulnerable, is think about how others would observe you as a person and why you are the right person to make a difference in this how might we that you laid out. So what do people know about Emily that have them believe that Emily can be someone who will make a difference in the lives of young women? And think about what you've heard from colleagues or family members or what you might hear. This is sort of like when someone asks you in a job interview, what are the 3 adjectives people would use to describe you? So for example, I have a couple here. People might say, oh, Emily's a really inspiring educator. So she can actually be the one to move the needle on young women's development, or she's someone people follow and therefore we think she'll make a difference as a leader. So take a minute and get uncomfortable and write a couple of these things down. They could be thoughts you have about you, but also that you imagine others would observe about you. And you're not going to be sharing this. This is just for yourself. Faith, I'm right that we're going to 12:30, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, making sure I wasn't getting confused. Okay, great. So please continue to fill in these observations as you go, because I think that it's just a great exercise anyway to think about what others think of you positively or negatively as a disruptor, that could lead to disruption. And also it'll help support this kind of mission that you're building out. So the next thing that we would do in design thinking is to start brainstorming lots of ways that we could go about this outcome, right? This thing that we're trying to move toward in the world. And this is a little tricky for this frame because what we're thinking about now is what are different ways that you could aim for that end game now or in the future, because they're so broad. So for Elon, who wants to build resilience, it's, what are as many things as you can think of that actually would help young adults build resilience, right? It could be literally, I don't know, have them throw tennis balls against the wall for 4 hours and just see if they can make it, right? That would be considered a silly brainstorm idea. And then there could be other things that are kind of more sophisticated programs, or there could be out there in the world. So we don't have a lot of time here. I'm going to say I would love, though, for you to start the brainstorm so that you can complete it later. Just start to think through some things that you believe could be done in this world to move closer to that outcome. And if you need more examples, just let me know. And for this modality, I'm going to ask that when you do have one or two, can you pop them into the chat as sort of a a quick way to share out, it would be really exciting to see some of these. And it doesn't matter if it doesn't make any sense to us because we're not in your head. That's fine. I just want to hear a couple. Here's some typing. All right, we'll give it 20 more seconds. Would love to see a couple pop up, and if not, we'll just keep moving. Okay, so feel free to keep populating or send them in as you go, but I'm going to assume did you guys come up with a few? Can you nod your heads or shake your heads?
Yeah, Naomi, they're in the chat function if you...
Oh, I'm so sorry. I couldn't see those for some reason. Thought I was really good at Zoom, but I guess not. All right, I'm ending it for just a minute. Or actually, Faith, are you able to read them out? Because
yeah, sure, absolutely. Okay.
Thanks.
So from James, he said building self-esteem. Elon, accept metaphorical 31-3 losses.
Do you want me to explain that for a second?
Maybe we'll come back to it at the end. Let me read
Okay.
them all of them and then come back. From Rebecca, implementing curricula about conversion in Jewish schools, synagogues, and camps. Emily, ask more women to run for office locally and in student government. I love where you're thinking today, Emily. Elon, be okay with that which makes us uncomfortable. Emily, buy from female-owned businesses. From James, provide opportunities to flex their leadership abilities. And for me, facilitate a campaign of writing bureaucrat habites. What does home mean to people? What do they want people to feel and experience when coming to their home? Give people grants to host Shabbat meals and learning groups in their homes with their friends.
Oh my gosh, I love these. You guys are amazing. I'm sorry I couldn't see any of them and assumed that nobody was chatting, but these are fantastic. I mean, I think that they're both powerful and achievable if you can break them down and start to move toward them. But they give me the chills. I love them. And the next thing you would do is to pick a few that you love, which, you know, it sounds like you already have, and you can, again, keep building on this list. But some of them are going to be feasible and some aren't, right? That's why we come up with so many. And I mentioned this earlier, but now you can actually see the visual. You can see my screen, right? We're back. You can see the visual now of, I don't know, have you guys seen this in design thinking? It might be one of the older diagrams, but this is essentially, in order for a solution to work, for the most part, it needs to be three things, and it needs to live at the intersection. It needs to be a desirable solution for the population that you're speaking about. So, you know, women have to want to run for office, for example. It has to be viable. They have to be allowed to, and the system has to exist, and it has to be feasible. And that's just sort of the operational, like, it has to actually happen. And then where innovation lives is at the intersection of both. So that's sort of a litmus test for seeing, well, which of these is worth pursuing and which isn't. And that's just a nice little learning. I find that useful in my work as well. And I think especially in Hillel with so much programming and program ideas, it's a really useful matrix to figure out, okay, we're not going to do everything. Which of these is most, is the best fit? So in the last couple minutes, I do want to spend some time thinking about, well, what is stopping us from doing this work that we care so much about? And I know that it's time, but time is really a lovely excuse, and there's often something more underneath that. There's often something that's really actually mental or emotional that's getting in our way from getting us to do what we really want to do in the world and to make that impact. So think for a second, you know, first of all, how far do you feel from getting this done or from getting closer to that big outcome that you mentioned? And so many of them are so hard to measure, right? How do you know when young people are resilient versus when they weren't? But I think because you're passionate about this, you can tell kind of how far away it is from you, and think personally, how far do you feel and what is getting in your way? And actually you would make it practical and think of a couple barriers getting in your way. So you might feel like, well, I'm not an expert in this, right? I'm not the person. There's so many people who care about, you know, Jewish homes. I'm not a rabbi. I'm not the person who can go out there and make this difference. That would be an example of a psychological barrier. And this is why I said we'd get vulnerable today, because I actually thought we'd have more time to really talk these through and coach each other. But give a little thought to that in the next minute, so that you can start and kind of continue after. What might be getting in your way? And actually, I'm not going to ask you to share this, so feel free to get as vulnerable as you can, or as honest with yourself as you can. And if you've written one barrier down, feel free to raise your hand. So I just get a sense. That would be great. That may have been a hand. 20 more seconds. I want to respect the end time here. Okay, and the last thing I really, really do want to get to before saying thank you so much is there's nothing more important than starting today and being accountable. So thinking through what are 1 to 2 to 3 small steps you could take today to put this in motion. Even if it's making one phone call or doing one Google search, what is going to get you there? And I'm going to ask you to think for a second, and this I do want you to share so that we can have a little bit of accountability even here in this virtual room. And I'll think of one as well. People sending them into the chat, because I can't see where my chat box is. Or people just typing, that's fine too. Okay, if anyone has one to share, just one step they will take today, and by that I mean in the next 24 hours, please share.
My next meeting actually is with our student leader, who's the VP for Religious and Spiritual Life, and I'm actually talking with her. This is confidential, right? About the possibility of integrating an Orthodox rabbi who works on campus into our team more officially, which is it's complicated on a lot of levels and it's important on a lot of levels. Mm-hmm. And we're having a conversation actually about it today. And actually, this reminded me that was on our agenda today. I almost forgot because I thought something was going to be hammered out before we even had this meeting today. So, voila.
Nice. Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, and these should always be things that wouldn't otherwise happen unless you were taking this stretch, which even if it was on your agenda, it sounds like it wouldn't have happened. So that's great.
I mean,
maybe not, right?
James shared something via the text, which was making sure that our next summer grad Shabbat has a space to meet and trying to make use of local seminary space, the lawn.
Nice. Great. And then I'm going to encourage you guys to think, even personally, what is something you could do today to kind of start to break through a personal barrier that's facing you and getting these awesome outcomes done. Because that's really, at the end of the day, it's not the procrastination or the lack of space. It's usually us. But that's a whole other seminar. Okay, so
we're all going to find a good therapist.
Amen. Hey, it's all one and the same. That's awesome. So, right, this is your accountability structure, and I just want to thank you so much for being so engaged. This really flew by for me. I hope it was productive and inspiring for you. I'm really happy to keep talking. I had my email at the beginning. I will send out these slides, or Faith can send them out, and feel free to be in touch. But thank you so much for taking the time out today. It was really wonderful.
Naomi, I just want to echo that. You are such a articulate, curious person, and I think that curiosity and like real openness to identifying problems and opportunities is what makes innovation. And I think you really model that. So thank you so much for walking through this. I know that these slides are going to be useful for folks in their work. So I look forward to sharing them with everyone. And I will be in touch, everyone, about the recording and about sharing these slides and about next webinars.
And any feedback, feel free to let me know. I'm really open to it. Thank you all. Happy Tuesday.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.